Welcome back. National CPR and AED Awareness Week is underway, and health advocates say knowing what to do in the first few minutes of a cardiac emergency can mean the difference between life and death. One Kaukauna middle school teacher survived because her coworkers acted immediately. Now she's pushing to make sure more schools are prepared. 12 years ago, Kayla Houle walked into her classroom feeling sick. Minutes later, the 24-year-old teacher collapsed in the hallway and suffered sudden cardiac arrest. Her heart stopped. Kayla tells us she doesn't remember the event.
I was 24. Right? I had no previous issues. I had, nothing prior, no family history, nothing. And that is the scariest part of cardiac arrest, is that it can happen to anyone at any time, anywhere.
Coworkers immediately started CPR while others rushed to get an AED. After 3 shocks and a trip to the hospital, Houle survived. Now Houle is pushing for changes designed to save the next person. She recently traveled to Washington to lobby for funding of the Federal Hearts Act, a program created to help schools pay for CPR training, AEDs, and cardiac emergency response plans. In Wisconsin, she's also advocating for legislation that would require public schools to have those plans in place.
You can't do anything wrong in that moment. The only thing that you can do that's wrong in that moment is to watch it and do nothing.
That message is driving her push for more CPR training, more AEDs, and cardiac emergency response plans, as more than 350,000 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests occur in the U.S. each year.
It was a miracle that saved my life that day. I want it to be the expectation, right, moving forward, that anyone can expect for that type of response in a situation like what I went through.
According to the American Heart Association, immediate CPR can double or even triple a person's chance of survival. Houle says learning hands-only CPR takes just a few minutes, but in an emergency, those minutes could save a life.